Hey guys, this is your boy Cal Newport, aka DJU, coming at you with another music psychology video. And in this one, I'm going to be going over an audiobook I just finished reading called Deep Work by Cal Newport. It's a fucking awesome book. Would highly recommend reading it. In addition, also just got finished reading his other book, So Good You Can't, So Good You They Can't Ignore You. Pretty much everything by this guy is super, super good. So if you haven't read any of his stuff, would definitely suggest picking up yourself up a copy and checking out because pretty much front to back, they're all really good. Suggestions not only for artists, although I definitely find a lot of it tends to be more artists and writers and pretty much anything that relates to creativity. But there's also a lot of practical advice in the previous book as well as in this one in terms of if you're trying to find a career and that sort of stuff. But as this is a music psychology thing, I know you guys, pretty much most of you, are looking for stuff that will help you out in your field. So I picked out a couple, at least amongst my huge list of notes, a couple highlights that I've really liked that I thought you guys would enjoy to kind of give you a sense of what the book's all about. That way, I can go get you guys interested in reading the full thing. So the first thing I learned from reading Deep Work, and this was actually because the premise of the book, just to give you guys some background on it, is that Cal puts a big emphasis on when you're getting into the studio, making that your primary focus, and he calls that primary focus deep work. The reason why he suggests at least because we're all, as us producers, in this big ADHD environment where we have the internet, our phones, calendars, all packed up into one device, as well as a music making thing, is that it's the temptation to go and kind of multitask while you're making music is so prominent that it's, at least from my experience, and I can definitely see as he talks about it, it's really hard to get any sort of really deep creative work done. And the first thing that I found really interesting that he pulled out was that he actually pulled out, I think it was a science study, I think, slash book that covered science studies. And the book was called, I forget the name of it. Basically, the study revolved around, talked a lot about how in your brain there's a substance called myelin that wraps around the various connections. And it's that myelin that speeds up the connections so that when you're learning motor control, like let's say I'm learning how to do a punch, for instance, by repeating it over and over again, it'll myelinate the connections that allow me to do the punch so that if I practice this punch enough times, it allows me to perform it at a very high level. Now, how that relates to this is that when they took a look at people who were learning a specific task, people who are doing it in kind of an ADHD multitasking style where they're performing multiple tasks in addition to making music, and then people compare that to people who are just making music, they found that the myelin concentration for the people who are just focused on making music was much more dense and created the necessary connections needed to make yourself better. It was better for the guys who are making the music solely as opposed to the guys who are more ADHD. Because the guys who were ADHD weren't only myelinating the specific connections that allowed them to, EQ that kick, choose that sound. They were also myelinating, is spreading out the myelination among other things what have you, maybe like some other things like trying to figure out maybe the social smarts, if that's the right way of putting about it, when you're browsing Facebook. Pretty much, long and the short of it, it was myelinating. The myelination was spread out when the person had kind of an ADHD approach, thereby it took him a lot longer to learn the necessary skills as opposed to making studio time just studio time, making that your sole focus. So that was the long wind. The first thing that I found really interesting is that there's a scientific backing to all of this deep work main focus that he talks about. The second thing, at least on the topic of ADHD, that I found really helpful, and at least I've been implementing for the last couple of months, but it's great to see him remind me again, is that you don't have to forego distractions altogether. Because I know a lot of people are like, oh, I'm gonna be musician 12 hours a day, and I'm just gonna make that the whole. I'm gonna make that my whole focus. I'm not gonna worry about any, miscellaneous extra activities outside maybe grabbing a quick bite to eat. But this is gonna be my sole focus. And what he finds, and at least what I found, is that if you do this, it's kind of hard to motivate yourself to sit down in the studio for 10 to 12 hours. In fact, a lot of the time frames he talks about here, he finds the most high performers spend 2 to 4 hours. There's always the occasional exceptions I can think of. Madeon, for instance, talks a lot about spending 24 hours and all that. But you find, at least he talks a little bit about, you find that people who spend those longer hours tend to have a lot more experience backing them up. So they kind of already have the connection, so that it's more just about executing it. So he suggests for people who are starting out, and you're trying to get up that initial learning curve, that's kind of hard to overcome. He suggests allowing you to give yourself like section out times where you can be distracted as kind of a reward for yourself for sticking through the 1 to 2 hour sessions. And I found that, at least even though I was doing all this, I found that reminder super helpful. Figured it'd be of value to you guys. So a second trick you can take. And then a third trick that I found really interesting, and I guess once he mentioned it, it made perfect sense to me, is that if you radically change your environment, let's say like go to a coffee shop, there's something about your brain having to put kind of the sunk cost of having to go travel all that way just to do this given activity tends to make it a lot easier to focus on that activity. So to give an example, this author talks about how one of his writer friends booked a two-way ticket from I think like New York to China and back. So he would be on the plane for like 15 hours there and 15 hours back, and he spent that entire time just writing a book. And like literally, because he had a really short deadline and he needed some really weird avant-garde way to get himself to sit down for that entire time. So he found that if he like radically changed his environment and like told himself, it kind of gave himself a environmental signal that something's different and we're going to be focusing on this altogether, it tended to help him a lot more getting the thing done. And then another story I just quickly touch on, because I don't want to ramble on stories the entire time, is I think the J.K. Rowling of the Harry Potter series, I guess one of her practices sometimes is that when she needs to focus solely on writing a book, she'll actually rent out a room in a hotel nearby, a couple miles from her, just to specifically write, so she could tell her mind, hey, we're radically changing the environment so we can focus on this one task. So those were a few highlights of the book that I really liked. Again, would highly, highly recommend picking up this book, reading it front to back. Personally, like doing the audiobook, putting on like 2 or 3x, then you can do it while you're driving in mundane traffic or doing the dishes, what have you. Either way, would highly recommend this. Again, the book is Deep Work by Cal Newport, available at all your favorite shops. And with that little plug out of the way, hope you guys enjoyed it. I think because I also finished his other book, what was it? So Good They Can't Ignore You. I've got a bunch of notes there, so if you guys like this little video I did, be sure to give it a like. And if I get, I would say 30 likes on this one, or just a shit ton of comments down below saying you really like it on YouTube, I'll go ahead and make a little short, quick couple highlights from that book. So for you people who are maybe a little bit lazy or don't want to do it, I can give you some of the golden gems you can take and run with. But with all that out of the side, it's been your boy, Cal Newport, aka DJ Boo, coming at you with another music psychology video. Hope you guys enjoyed. Hope you guys can take a couple of these golden nuggets to help you in the studio. And with that, we'll check out for now.